All right, welcome. My name is Laurel Peterson. For those of you who are in my class but online and don't recognize my face, I am your teacher. Professor Peterson, anyway. So welcome to Writers in Conversation. I have two amazing writers with me here tonight. Sharbari Ahmed is an award-winning writer of film and fiction. She was on the writing team for the TV series Quantico on ABC. She adapted the middle grade novel Rickshaw Girl by Mitali Bose Perkins. Did I say that? Okay, awesome. For the screen, and the screen adaptation of her stage play Raisins Not Virgins, a romantic comedy about jihad, was part of the Tribeca All Access program at the Tribeca Film Festival and nominated for Best Original Screenplay. She authored a novel, Dust Under Her Feet, in 2019, a short story collection, The Ocean of Mrs. Nagai Stories, 2013. Another collection, The Strangest of Fruit, is forthcoming in 2025. Her short fiction has appeared in many literary journals. She presented a TEDx talk, Between the Kaaba Sharif and a Hard Place, in April 2018. She teaches in the master's program at Sacred Heart University and the MFA programs at Manhattanville University and Fairfield University, and lives in Darien. Chris Belden is the author of the novels Carry On and Shriver, which was made into the film A Little White Lie and is very funny. As well as the story collections Who Am I to Judge and The Floating Lady of Lake Tawaba? Tawaba, okay. A graduate of the Fairfield University MFA program, Chris was named a Connecticut Arts Hero in 2019 for his 10-plus years running a writing workshop at a maximum security prison. Closer to Freedom, an anthology of prose and poetry from that workshop, was published in 2023. So, here's how it's going to go. Each of the writers is going to read for about 15 minutes, and then I'm going to ask them questions for about 15 minutes, and then you're going to ask them questions for about 15 minutes, and then we have to let the library staff go home. But somewhere in there also, you brought books, right?
Yeah.
Yes, they both brought books. Alliteration, man, it's like getting me tonight. With them, and they would be happy to sell those to you. So I encourage you to at least come take a look and talk to the writers after it's over. So thank you for coming. Who would like to start?
Rock, paper, scissors.
1, 2, 3. You get to choose.
Here you go, girl.
Should I stand there?
Yes, you can
Okay.
do whatever
You
you
can
want.
do whatever
Okay.
you want.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's still gonna be hard.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. It's unseasonably warm.
Turn the mic up a
Or is it
little
just
bit.
normal? Oh, turn it up? Yeah.
Yeah, you can't, I don't know if
I don't think you can turn it
there.
up. You might just have to keep it
Hello?
closer. There
Oh,
you go.
keep it closer? Okay.
Yep.
So I thought this was is this about page to screen adaptations, or is it loose?
It's loose.
It's loose?
Yes.
I hope
Okay.
so.
All right, but I took that seriously.
Okay.
And so I did bring, so I brought my novel, Dust Under Her Feet, which I have adapted into a TV pilot. It's making the rounds now out in La La Land. And I thought I would read a section of my novel and then read to you how I adapted it
Cool.
into the
Yeah,
pilot.
that's awesome.
Okay, and I don't know, hopefully that won't take too long.
All right.
Okay, so Dust Under Her Feet is set in 1940s Calcutta, India, and it's about the American military presence in Calcutta during that time. So there's a lot of American servicemen who poured into Calcutta in the 40s on their way to Burma, where they fought the Japanese and under harrowing circumstances. And in fact, had the Allies not won in Burma, and they came close many times to not winning, Japan would have taken over China and India, even if we defeated the Germans. So that's an interesting, note, because I thought it was all one big grab bag, but it wasn't. It was two separate theaters of war. So this fascinated me. I was fascinated by an American presence in South Asia, because you know about the British, right? Not the Americans. And in Calcutta at that time, a lot of nightclubs popped up to entertain the American servicemen. So the story is set in a nightclub I named Bombay Duck, which is a fish. I'll just leave it at that. We South Asians are weird. Okay. So this is a scene where the owner of the nightclub and the protagonist, Yasmin Khan, has to turn away 3 African-American officers from her club, because this, you have to understand, is British Raj India, where even Indians were not allowed in certain spaces in their own country. And then I will read you the adaptation into the screenplay of that scene. Okay? Adil Babu gently tapped Yasmin on the shoulder. "What is it?" she said, and sighed. "There are some customers who wish to come in," he said, still very quiet. His face, as usual, was impassive. "So, let them in," Yasmin said, annoyed. "Have I ever disturbed you if it wasn't necessary?" "No, I suppose not." "Then please come to the back." 3 American soldiers stood in the alley, smoking. One said something, the other 2 laughed loudly. Now Asma was singing Stormy Weather, and they stopped to listen, their heads bowed as if praying. Yasmin watched them listen. "Not bad," one of them said. "Almost like home," another one added wistfully. "Almost," the third one said. They turned to see Yasmin and Adil Babu watching them. All 3 immediately took off their caps. 2 of them stubbed their cigarettes out under their feet. "Namaste, ma'am," the first one who had spoken said. He was the tallest of the 3. He looked Yasmin over in open appreciation and broke into a wide smile, displaying a row of gleaming, if somewhat crooked teeth. As if in support of his friend's opinion, one of the other men whistled softly. The third man, who looked younger than his companions and was lighter skinned, almost white, like Patience, could have passed for white, was quiet. He finished his cigarette and looked away. Yasmin saw his jaw tighten. She thought suddenly that it must almost be harder for him, being so obviously from both worlds, and with only, as the horrible expression went, a touch of the tar brush. But that was considered enough to be viewed as kalo, which is black in Bengali, forever. Yasmin's heart beat a little faster. Their faces were so hopeful. "We were wondering, ma'am, if it would be possible to sneak us in and let us sit in the back. We're engineers, ma'am." "We have money," another one interrupted. He held out a handful of rupees. "It is not about that," she said very softly. There was a burst of laughter from inside the club as the band started up a new number. Yasmin hated turning people away for no good reason. "No one would notice us, ma'am," the first one said. Yasmin looked at Adil Babu. "Why shouldn't they come in?" she said to him in Bengali. "They are paying customers." "You know why," Adil Babu replied. He looked over her shoulder at the young men who were politely looking away, allowing them privacy. "Adil Babu, there is nothing separating us from them," she said. You think I don't know that?" he said. "It's ridiculous, but it's the law. I'm doing this tonight. Tomorrow, while I'm walking down the street, I'll have to step aside if an Ingres, an English person, walks close to me." Yasmin looked at the young men again. She could tell the light-skinned one was proud, and that somehow made it worse. He had made no eye contact with anyone. He looked down the alley as his friends pleaded to be let in. "You can't come in," she said finally, "but you can stay and listen, and we will serve you. Leave this door open, Adil Babu, and send Rahul to take their orders." "Yasmin," Adil Babu began. "They can stay," she said firmly. "But you have to sit here," she told the men, "where no one can see you. We'll bring your chairs and drinks and food and whatever you need on the house." "Thank you," one of them called after Yasmin as she walked away. She could hear them talking. "Man, Tommy, did you see that piano? What you wouldn't give just to get hold of that piano? Did you see it?" "Yeah, I saw it." "Maybe if she hears you play." "Shut your mouth, boy. Better than nothing. I'd rather take nothing." "Oh, come on now, Tommy. It's not bad. We can hear the music. And she said on the house." "Sitting in the alley like a stray-ass dog." "You said it yourself. All the comforts of home." Yasmin stopped to listen at the laughter. How could they laugh, she wondered. How often they must be humiliated like this. "I'm paying," Tommy said. "I don't care about on the house." "Suit yourself. She's beautiful. She's as colored as me." "Quiet, Tom. Come on now." Inside, Yasmin gestured to Radhika to come to her. "Go to the kitchen. Adil Babu will hand you a tray of food and drinks. If it's too much, get Rahul to help you." Radhika nodded, puzzled. "Take the tray to the alley, but don't walk through the club. Exit from the kitchen and go to the back." "Yes, I think Rahul will have to help you." Radhika nodded again, still puzzled. Yasmin waited for her to ask a question and was very grateful when she didn't. She liked this about Radhika. The girl wasn't inquisitive, even when confused. There are 3 American servicemen in the alley awaiting food and drink. After you give them the tray, make sure the back door is left ajar and so they can hear the music, but not enough so they can see anyone or anyone can see them. I'll meet you here in a moment. Don't talk to them. Do you understand? Okay, so that's the scene from the novel. And this is how I adapted it for the pilot, the TV pilot.
Just a sec.
Yeah,
Can you hear in the back?
you can hear? Okay, awesome.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
So I named the TV show Bombay Duck after the nightclub because they don't like long titles for TV shows in Hollywood. Okay, this is Act 5 of the pilot. Interior, Bombay Duck, main floor / alley, continuous. Yasmin and Adil Babu walk to the back of the club. The Kathak music continues in the background. Yasmin stops to watch Radhika for a beat. Shot of Radhika dancing. Shot of Louis' enthralled face. Back to Yasmin and Adil Babu walking to the side entrance. Yasmin, remind me, I have to talk to her later. I was too hard on her probably. Adil Babu, with all your edges, this is who you have a soft corner for? Yasmin, bollocks. So, what's so urgent? Adil Babu, what was so urgent at the bar with that Yankee fellow? Yasmin flashes him a warning look, but is silent. Adil Babu opens the door to the alley, revealing Tommy and his friends. Franklin and William immediately remove their hats. Tommy does too, but slowly, his gaze never leaving Yasmin's face. Yasmin, startled in Bengali to Adil Babu. What's the meaning of this? Adil Babu, Bengali. They want to come in. I was trying to tell you that, but that white officer was there. Adil Babu, he's supposedly their friend, but clearly doesn't know the policies. Yasmin, they can't come in. Indicating Tommy, he can. Adil Babu, he won't. He's one of them. Yasmin looks at Tommy. Tommy scowls and replaces his cap. He doesn't speak Bangla, but understands fully. Tommy, we understand, ma'am. We'll be going. They start to leave. Then the absurdity of it washes over her. Yasmin, in English to the men. It's absurd, I know. They turn back to her. Tommy, that's one word to describe it. Yasmin, no, I mean, it's truly ridiculous because neither of us would be allowed into a British club. And here, I'm not sure what to do with you lot. Tommy smiles, she chuckles, it's mirthless. Tommy is struck by her words. Yasmin looks at Adil Babu and shakes her head, almost to herself. Yasmin says, ironic. Adil Babu, what should we do? Franklin, we have rupees, man. I don't doubt it, officer. The problem is, we could have our certificate revoked. Yasmin trails off as she and Adil Babu look at one another in silent exchange. Adil Babu, Bangla. Yasmin, we can let them in later, maybe when the crowd is so drunk it thins out. Yasmin turns back to the men. She and Tommy lock eyes, and this surprises them both. They look away. She watches the crowd in the club for a beat as Radhika exits the stage. Yasmin, we can serve you here. We'll set up a table and chairs and serve you on the house. Adil Babu is shocked, but pleasantly so. Yasmin, that's the best I can do. Tommy, we can pay. Yasmin, you can hear the music clear as a bell from here if we leave the door open, but the side curtain's drawn. She watches as Radhika finishes her set and Madhu comes on stage, crooning and dancing simultaneously. Franklin, shooting Tommy a look. That'll be just fine, ma'am. William, our own private concert. Yasmin and Adil Babu leave to make the arrangements. Tommy, she's as colored as we are. William, come on now, Tommy. I think she's beautiful and fine and classy. Franklin, she's doing the best she can. We can always go to the Great Eastern. William, I don't feel like hauling it over there. It's not so bad here. Franklin, no one's ever offered to serve us for free. Tommy, making us sit in the alley like stray-ass dogs. William, yes indeed, all the comforts of home. A beat, and they all burst into laughter. Yasmin and Adil Babu hear them. Yasmin, incredulous. How can they laugh in the face of this kind of treatment? Adil Babu remains silent. Yasmin, I know. Like Patience says, what's the alternative? They pass Patience, handing the Ferguses drinks. She shoots Yasmin a look, who shrugs apologetically. Interior, Bombay Duck green room moments later. Yasmin walks in. Radhika is taking off her ankle bells. Yasmin, Radhika, there will be a prepared tray of food and a tray of drinks in the kitchen. So that's the adaptation of the scene I just read to you. How much spare time? Is it 15 minutes?
It's 15 minutes.
Excellent, okay. Great. Here you go, Chris.
All right. Do you want to say
yours.
Hands off. Thank you, Sharbari. That was really interesting. Thank you, Laurel, for inviting us. Thank you to the library for having us. And thank you for being here. I'm going to read a chapter from a new novel called The Vote. Timely title. Just a little background. This novel grew out of an experience that I had in 2015, 1 year before the 2016 presidential election. And like a lot of people, I woke up after that 2016 election and said, what the hell just happened? And realized that I should not have been surprised, given how divided the country had become and how divided my neighborhood had become over what seemed like a very small-time affair of a local referendum that divided the community 1 year before the 2016 election. And so I fictionalized that, and there are 20 plus, about 24 protagonists in this novel. It's the main protagonist really is the neighborhood. The neighborhood happens to be Lake Tawaba, which also appears in my collection of short stories. And this chapter is from the perspective of a woman in the neighborhood who is known throughout the neighborhood only as the folk singer. The folk singer always took her weekend walk around the lake early in the morning before most of her neighbors woke up. This way, no one could bother her. During the week spent with Leo at their apartment in the city, she couldn't go for walks without being interrupted. At any time of the day or night, people would approach to chat about the first time they heard her version of Kumbaya, or This Land Is Your Land, or any of her several old hits, or maybe they want to get an autograph or lately take a cell phone photo with her. Most people were polite, but some acted in an entitled fashion that bothered her. And occasionally people confused her with Joan Baez, which made her crazy. So to avoid such annoyances here at the lake house, she forced herself from bed at 6 and headed out wearing large sunglasses and a floppy hat for a disguise. The early hour usually also meant cooler temperatures, but this morning the heat had already grown oppressive. Even in her thinnest cotton muumuu, the one Leo bought for her in Hawaii, she felt the sweat break out beneath her drooping breasts. And the sun had not even topped the tree line. She had hoped to go antique shopping with Leo today. Maybe they could just stay inside with the AC turned up high. A few years ago, she might have taken a dip in the lake on a day like today. She loved sitting in one of their Adirondack chairs with a tall glass of iced tea. And when the spirit took her, stepping out onto the dock and leaping into the refreshing water. Not anymore. Brown-green algae baked by the sun into a curdled muck stretched from the shoreline all the way out to near the middle of the lake, where just a few misshapen ovals of water remained unblemished. Even a ride in the canoe had become unpleasant. Then there was the stench, a rancid odor that put her in mind of death. It had gotten so bad that she told Leo she wanted to sell the house, but Leo loved this place, algae and all, and so far wouldn't hear of selling. Slightly out of breath, she headed up an incline on Tawaba Lane, where even just a few feet closer to the sun, the air seemed to thicken even more. It was like walking through cottage cheese. On her right, in between the houses, she caught glimpses of the algae-coated lake. What a shame. Last year, the Lake Association had asked her to headline a benefit concert at the local playhouse. They wanted to raise enough money to do some sort of project, and she referred them to her manager, but had heard nothing since. She didn't like to get involved in business negotiations. That's what her manager got his 15% for. Plus, mixing business and her personal life, well, it was just awkward. She liked things compartmentalized. Last week, for example, she gave that speech at the addiction conference. Imagine if she'd been hired by a friend or neighbor. The negotiations would have been so sticky. She'd probably have felt so guilty about her $10,000 fee that she'd have been compelled to return it. Keep it simple, dear, Leo liked to say, and he was right. Then there was the matter of her voice. Lately, for the first time since her cocaine days, her instrument had started to fade on her. She barely noticed at first, the occasional slip on a high note, a flattening out, artfully disguised by her sound man, Robbie, who knew when to lean on the reverb. She had shrugged it off. She was almost 70 after all, but then it started to happen more regularly. And even Leo noticed with his famously tin ear. She consulted a well-regarded voice coach who advised her to lower the key on her most difficult tunes, but that felt like a cheat. She'd been scaling Mount Everest for more than 50 years and now had to stop short of the peak. She fired the coach and adopted a routine of near silence and herbal remedies. Except for the occasional well-paying speaking gig, she had rarely uttered more than a few words to anyone these past few months, and had almost convinced herself that the problem was temporary. Then came her long-ago contracted engagement at the Cafe Cumberland. She performed there many times, always to sold-out audiences and rave reviews. What was it the Times had said about last year's week of shows? Her voice still possesses the silky richness of a well-seasoned instrument. But during the first of this year's 8 scheduled performances, right in the middle of Goodnight Irene, her voice dipped, as if it had stepped into an unseen pothole, and she panicked, couldn't find her way back, and stopped the song halfway through, something she hadn't done since the night a redneck threw a stone at her during a benefit concert in Mississippi almost 50 years ago. Even during her drug-fueled years, she'd never bailed on a song, though she may have botched a lyric here and there. At the Cumberland, she started the song again, but sang tentatively for the rest of the night, waiting for the next pothole in the dark. The Times critic was in the audience, and perhaps out of kindness, he was an old friend, he did not submit a review. She finished that weekend's shows, but canceled the second weekend's performances, citing illness. For days now, Leo had been fielding calls from concerned friends to whom she declined to speak, less from the fear she might hurt her voice than the fear she might burst into tears. Yesterday, Leo suggested they get out of the city, and they arrived at the lake house just as the sun set. Normally a lovely time of day, but somewhat spoiled by the unsightly algae in the golden light of dusk. A car drove past, and the man behind the wheel waved without smiling or even looking at her closely. How nice it was not to be stopped and asked to sign a Chinese takeout menu, or whether she knew Pete Seeger, or, God forbid, questions about her health. The road was blessedly deserted, and she'd gotten halfway around the lake before she saw anyone else. At the beach stood a man she'd occasionally seen walking his dog, a decrepit terrier of some kind, its legs stiff with arthritis. The man always wore one of those baseball caps that look ridiculous on anyone over 25. And he moved almost as slowly as his dog, less from pain, it seemed, than from being in no hurry. He seemed to be about her age, retired probably, and something about his expression told her he might be a little tappy, or even suffering from dementia. This morning he stood staring at a large mound of sand on the beach. He seemed so interested in the sand that the folk singer wondered if she might manage to slip by without having to stop for a conversation. But then the dog noticed her and let out a hoarse little woof, and the man turned and saw her there. "Look at that," he said, motioning toward the sand. The folk singer took in the mound. Then she looked at the man, unsure of what he meant. "Notice anything funny?" he asked. The sand had been dumped from a truck, apparently, and stood about 4 feet high at its peak. "The color," the man said. "The color?" It was the most the folk singer had spoken in almost 24 hours. "Of the sand." He didn't say anything more, just seemed to be waiting for her to acknowledge his strange observation. She shrugged, reluctant to commit any more words to the situation. The man looked surprised and shook his head, impatient now. "It's too dark," he said finally. She turned her attention back to the sand. Yes, it was a bit darker than the old beach sand, but so what? "Maybe it's wet," she said softly to preserve her voice. He leaned forward and cupped a hand to his ear. "Is it wet?" she said, a bit louder this time. He looked at her as if she was the tappy one. "It's not wet," he said. He reached down to scoop up a handful. The dog watched closely, perhaps wondering if this was food. The man held out his hand for the folk singer to inspect. The sand did seem a bit dark, but she couldn't tell if that was because of soil mixed in or if it was just the kind of sand that appeared darker. She didn't know anything about sand. When she didn't react as expected, the man grunted and tossed the sand back onto the pile. Startled, the dog jumped back. "We got gypped," the man said as he wiped his hand on his tan trousers. "The lake board, they don't know what the hell they're doing." Oh, she understood now. She knew people like this man, people who complained about everything and felt surprised or even hurt when you saw things differently. "It's like this tax thing," he went on. "That's just what we need, another goddamn tax." Okay, she thought, I have his number now. There were two kinds of people in the world, those who believed in taxes and those who didn't. More and more, the world was divided along these lines with no third choice. "You read that letter?" the man asked. Letter? She didn't receive mail up here, didn't even have a mailbox. It all went to the apartment in the city, and Leo handled it. "I haven't seen the letter," she said. Her voice felt okay today, not strong maybe, but solid. The man squinted at her as if trying to figure her out. "You're that singer," he said. "You live in Gordy Levitt's old house." I suppose I do, she said. She hadn't known the previous owner. Leo had managed everything, plus that was years ago. Great guy, Gordy. Yes, well, she said, hoping to excuse herself gracefully. You said her name and then repeated it. Is that British, he asked. It is, she said, speaking up a bit now. My father's family is English. Good stock, the Brits, he said. Clearly he approved. Mrs. Thatcher, there was a great lady. How did we get on to Margaret Thatcher, she wondered. She never would have stood for this tax district idea, the man said. The folk singer didn't know what this man was talking about, nor did she want to continue the conversation. Just look at that goddamn lake, he went on, sweeping his arm like a presenter on a game show. The algae covered the water right up to the beach's edge. Didn't used to be like this. Yes, I know, she said. And they just want to throw money at it, our money, just like that African in the White House. The folk singer rarely encountered this man's type in her circle of entertainers and educated urbanites. Sure, she occasionally came upon some mega-wealthy financier who decried the progressive tax code and government regulations, but they were never so blatantly hostile. The disgusting way this man referred to the president, she couldn't hold back. I rather like him, she said. He's incredibly intelligent. She considered telling this man that she'd actually met the president, had in fact met a few of them, at least the Democratic ones. Intelligent, the man said, aghast. He's ruining this country. You're wrong, she said, riled now. She felt her throat tighten, but she couldn't stop. People like you are ruining this country with your ignorance and selfishness. The man looked at her and gave a half smile, as if he was enjoying this little sparring match. That angered the folk singer as much as anything. The charge certain people got for bullying. She'd seen it way back in men like William Buckley, all the way through Cheney and Bush and the jackals on the cable shows. They didn't care if you had facts or logic or common sense on your side. For them, it was all about emotion and the fight. You sound like a socialist, the man said. Oh dear, she said. Must you label everybody? I bet you cash your Social Security check each month. You betcha. That's my money. And mine, she said. And do you use Medicare? Hell yes. I guess that makes you a socialist too. And a hypocrite. He didn't know what to say to that. Even his dog looked at him, waiting for a retort. And as for the lake tax, she continued, I don't know anything about it, but you've convinced me to vote for it. Any movement you're against must be intelligent, fair, and worthwhile. He put on what he probably thought was a withering expression, but mostly he looked sad and old and a little confused, like one of those people who wander away from home and forget how to find their way back. It's starting to feel like North Korea around here, he said, more to the dog than to her. Oh, don't be so melodramatic, the folk singer said. Try thinking about others for a change. Again, he grinned. I bet you don't even know my name, he said. Should I, she asked. I live right across the street from you. Well, she said, feeling her throat clamp up. One can't always choose one's neighbors, I suppose. With that, she turned to walk away. Behind her, she imagined the man watching her recede, a look of abject defeat on his face. Though, based on her experience with people like that, he probably remained stubbornly defiant, convinced of his correctness in all things. No doubt he'd go home and torture his poor wife with the story of the socialist singer who wants to deprive old white men of their God-given rights. What must it be like to live with such a dinosaur? Leo may not be the most evolved creature, but compared to this guy, he was Noam Chomsky. The folk singer carried on, though she now felt a bit depleted. If she was going to encounter people like that, it wasn't worth it. She'd marched with Dr. King, been arrested with the Berrigans, and escorted terrified young women past screeching fanatics into abortion clinics. She didn't need to debate unpleasant old fools, not at her age, especially not in her fragile condition. Nevertheless, it had been well worth harming her voice to give that man a piece of her mind. She'd spoken well, she thought. Maybe it was time to put away her 12-string and run for office. She laughed at the thought. Over the years, she had periodically considered politics, but that was a young person's game. In a few months, she would turn 70. 70! It didn't seem possible. Just yesterday, she was 20 years old and crashing with the Laurel Canyon paths of beautiful young men. Half of them were dead now, or looked it. Unlike many of them, she'd stepped off the drug and booze merry-go-round fairly early on before she did any real damage. Not that she stopped for any altruistic reasons. Not for her children, certainly not for Leo. She stopped because it might kill her voice, and she loved to sing. More than anything, she loved to sing, to caress lyrics with her voice, to stand in front of an audience that really listened, ready to be moved. She did not want to give that up for a high that felt inadequate in comparison, and certainly not for politics. But now it seemed her voice was dying. Maybe she thought she should return to booze and drugs. It might even help her cope with crazy old coots like that man at the beach. She could feel the heat coming up off the road into her expensive walking shoes. Normally on this side of the lake, a pleasant breeze came rolling in off the water, but today the air did not stir. This discomfort and the encounter at the beach left her with a feeling of despair about the lake, the country, and her voice. Again, she contemplated retirement from performing. She could use her celebrity status to support progressive causes and organize movements that would infuriate the man at the beach. That's what the world needed now, not another old folk singer playing to rich old white people at a swanky cabaret. Harry Belafonte was brave enough to take the plunge. He told her about the recording session where he realized his singing voice had abandoned him, but not his voice as a human being. Perhaps the fear she had long harbored about moving on was just a waste of time. She could write another book. Her 2 memoirs had sold well. This one about how she left her career, one career for another. She would call her ghostwriter today and discuss the idea. She had reached the point directly across the lake from her home when she started to feel faint. A cloud of what looked like albino bees filled the air in front of her, and then she felt cold all over. This confused her, and she forgot where she was for a moment. She paused and leaned against a mailbox, waiting for this feeling to pass. She admonished herself for leaving her cell phone at home. Leo was always telling her to take it with her, but she loathed the damn thing. The worst developments in television, she often called it. The whole world was wasting its time looking at their phones. Plus, this Mumu had no pocket in which to put it. I should at least have eaten something, she thought, but she'd been anxious to start her walk before the neighbors awoke. Then there was that old man. He'd made any sensible person feel dizzy with consternation. After a moment, the bees moved off, and the day's heat enveloped her again. Not until she let go of the mailbox did she realize how tightly she'd been gripping it. She moved tentatively at first, grateful that Leo was not here to witness this. He probably called 911. And a million scans and tests later, she'd be sent home without any diagnosis beyond simple fatigue. She just needed to rest a bit, that's all. She turned off the pavement onto a brief stretch of dirt road that ran directly alongside this section of the lake. With each step, she felt a little stronger, but still the heat was oppressive. Only the thought of entering her air-conditioned house pushed her along. At the water's scummy edge, she saw dead fish floating white belly up. A few yards farther on, a red plastic beer cup lay half sunken in the shallows. Human beings are such selfish creatures, she thought. Like that man at the beach, for example. The things he'd said, they got under her skin for some reason. Perhaps she was feeling particularly vulnerable because of her voice troubles. She shook her head as if to dislodge the memory of the man from her mind. At the end of the dirt section, the road veered away from the water. For a quarter mile, she'd have to traverse a 2-way stretch of busy paved road before reconnecting to Tawaba Lane. She didn't enjoy this part of her walk. Cars often sped around the curve with no consideration for pedestrians on the narrow shoulder. And the air here, away from the lake, was even more humid. Just walking along the flat shoulder of the road, she felt as if she was climbing a steep hill. She had to practically gulp at the air to get a decent breath. Again, she thought of home, the cool air flowing from the vents, the sofa, and breakfast. She could hear the car's approach well before it appeared, its engine roaring as it headed into the curve. She paused, anticipating the moment when the driver would notice her and brake, but that never happened. The car, one of those massive things that people seem to prefer these days as if they regularly drove across vast deserts, hurtled around the bend, and while there was no actual contact between the car and the folk singer, she was certain it would strike her, and she pushed herself into a thick collection of thorny shrubs to get out of the way. As she did so, she stepped into a hole made perhaps by a groundhog, and fell deeper into the tangles and into a ditch. The car, meanwhile, sped on. It took a moment for her to come to her senses. Her ankle hurt sharply, and she had scratches up and down her arms and face. She tried to stand up, but a combination of thick shrubs and the pain in her ankle stopped her. "Damn it," she said. She looked through the dense, thorny shrubs toward the road and realized with a sick feeling that very few people walked by this spot on an early weekend morning, and no driver could possibly spot her here in this ditch behind the tangles. She shut her eyes for a moment and pictured Leo at the stove making an omelet, the aroma of coffee filling the house. She needed to get to her feet. She counted to 10, a trick she'd learned as a child when tearing off adhesive bandages, and attempted to stand again. She bored through the first moment of intense biting pain long enough to get herself onto one knee, but when she put weight on the affected ankle, it felt like someone had taken an axe to it. She collapsed, and forgetting her voice troubles, let out a deep howl. When the pain had ebbed a bit, she wiped the tears that pooled in her eyes. After a moment, she could think clearly enough to recognize and accept what she needed to do. She would have to shout for help. She took a few minutes to collect herself. Insects thrummed in her ears, the kind of bugs that thrive in heat and humidity. This tangled mess of brush probably teemed with ticks as well. She shuddered. "Okay," she said out loud, "let's do this." She took a deep breath into her lungs and, projecting from her diaphragm, yelled, "Help!" She cried out again and again and again, And each time her voice grew stronger until she found it almost felt good to holler like this, as if all the notes she had refused to speak in the past week had backed up inside her until now when she let them loose into the air. "Help," she shouted, "help me," each time rising up the scale. Fa, sol, la, ti, do. Her voice felt strong and clear, and she started laughing, picturing herself telling this story during her next engagement at the Cumberland, or perhaps on the Charlie Rose show. As a small car drove by, she called out even louder, but it kept right on going. "Damn you," she shouted. This was repeated a few times, passing car, curse, until the folk singer felt something give in her throat, a kind of stumble in her larynx, and it scared her enough that she let the next car by without making a sound. After a brief rest, she tried a test run, humming the melody of Blowing in the Wind, and it felt like she'd swallowed a stone. I've done it now, she thought. She heard approaching footsteps on the pebbles that edged the road, and she tried to call out, but nothing emerged, just a guttural expression of air. The footsteps grew louder as the walker approached, and she also heard the tinkle of metal on metal. What is that? Then it came to her. Dog tags. "Please," she tried to say, "help me." But a small airplane was flying directly overhead, and her already compromised voice could not be heard. A small, pale dog stuck its nose into the shrubs and sniffed loudly at the ground. She recognized it from the beach. The dog growled, and the folk singer hoped it would see her, maybe even bark. "Help," she croaked, but the dog was yanked away before it could react to her. "Come on, Gary." She recognized the gruff voice of the old man. If he would just turn a bit, he might see her buried in the bushes. She grabbed a branch to shake it, but the thorns dug into her skin and she let go. "Help," she said again, but by now the man had passed. "No," she cried, "no, no, no." Thanks very much.
Hand it around. How's that? All right, well, I was gonna start with the movie, TV thing, but I don't think I'm going to. I think I'm gonna start with social commitment, since that's so evident in both of your work that you've chosen to read this evening. Sharbari, you're dealing with racism and South Asian politics in your work, and Chris, you've been involved in teaching in the prison system. So can you talk a little bit about how that sense of social justice plays into your sense of yourself as a writer, and what you feel your role is in the world as writers? Good Lord.
Thanks, Jonathan. The honest answer is I don't know. I mean, I don't think about it. I'm not one of those writers who says, okay, I believe strongly about social justice and therefore I shall go into the prisons and work with prisoners and help them to express themselves. That's what I ended up doing for a while. I can't claim that it was out of some commitment to social justice. It's stuff I believe in, and I've kind of find through the side door, I guess. You know, I've worked with people in the past, running workshops with senior citizens, which was transforming for me, and the soup kitchens, the literacy programs, things like that. So I understand how writing and reading can change people, and it was more on kind of a personal level than a social justice kind of level. It was just like people who need to express themselves, particularly people who have had no opportunity or almost no opportunity in their lives to do that, who have never written anything more than maybe a letter, and these days an email, and even then a lot of the guys I worked with in prison had never sent an email in their life and didn't even know how to operate a phone. That's changed now because they have these tablets, but so anyway, I saw how that would change people and help them to grow and tell their stories and find confidence in themselves and do things that they needed to do for themselves. So it's very much on a micro level, more than the macro level. In terms of this novel, I just saw, I saw this division in the country, and I thought, man, I mean, this happened in my neighborhood of, you know, a few hundred people. No wonder you get hundreds of millions of people, everything gets screwed up so bad. And I just wanted to explore that, so, you know, so that's what I did. Thank you.
When I started writing this novel, I was doing it as a way to sort of find an intersection between my Bangladeshi and my American identities. And I loved old movies, you know, from the golden age of Hollywood. I absolutely adored them. And so I was trying to find a reconciliation of the two competing cultures of being a first generation immigrant. I stumbled on this bit of history that I don't think a lot of people know about, that Americans had sort of taken over Calcutta. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. And my first question was, I don't know why this popped into my head, but I knew that there were many African American soldiers who were shipped to the Pacific and to the China-Burma India Theater, the CBI, Theater of War. And I was like, so there were black soldiers in India. And I started thinking about that. And then I realized what it was for them over there. It was really interesting in a terrible way. They were segregated from, you know, the American military segregated them, and even the officers. But they treated the Indians very well. The Americans did, the white Americans, as opposed to how the British treated them. It was very interesting, raising the British colonists' ire. And of course, Americans, you know, we have this way of gamboling into town and taking over. And we did it in our, you know, inimitable American fashion. But the Indians were observing how they treated their African American and, in some instances, their Jewish troops, you know, othering them as well, which I discovered, but treated the Indians so well. And so I started thinking about that, and I started writing about it, and all these intersections, you know, came alive, these connections about colonialism, about how it is alive and well in 2024, how white supremacy is alive and well in the 21st century. And I think naturally that's how the story started unfolding, and naturally those elements came in, because this bizarre thing was happening in India at the time, where you had these black soldiers, these white soldiers, these Jewish soldiers, Americans all, but they were all treated differently. And then the Indians were, this was the twilight of the British Raj, so in any time an empire starts going down, the imperialists panic and they become more brutal. And so I was trying to capture that, and I think, so there, like, similarly to Chris, I don't think there was any kind of conscious, like, I'm going to write about social justice. This is, when any writer worth their salt starts exploring the human condition, social justice somehow comes to the fore naturally, you know? It can. Maybe not for Bret Easton Ellis or writers like that who wrote American Psycho or whatever, but I think generally, especially writers who are writing now, in the now, I think it's hard to avoid it, you know. So I hope that answers your question.
However you answer it is just fine. So back to the film question, because I know a lot of my students are here for that. So you've both been involved in having work turned into film. Sharbari, obviously you're writing your own treatments. And Chris, when I invited you for this, you were like, I wasn't really involved. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how that process happens, how you were involved in it, why you enjoy doing that kind of work.
Sure. So this novel was always meant to be on the screen, but I needed to work out the characters, so I took the scenic route and wrote a novel first, and that is not advisable. But it did help me work out the characters and the story in a way that's, you know, I think more compelling and more layered. And so I've always wanted to be a screenwriter. First and foremost. So, but I discovered that in order for me to work out my screenplay stories, I need to sort of explore them in fictional form, in prose first.
Okay.
That's just my process.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's how it happened. And then I fell into television and realized that we're in the golden age of television now, I feel. And more people are staying at home and getting their entertainment than actually venturing out to theaters, unless there's an Avenger involved or something. But so yeah, that's how it happened. And the process is, I don't know if any of you clocked the difference between the novel and the adaptation. It was similar but different.
Mm-hmm.
There was things I added, things I took out, things I enhanced, things I explored, things I left to the wayside, and so I just love the process of doing that. But I don't think I'm ever going to first write a novel to make it into a movie. I'm never going to do that again.
I started out actually writing screenplays, and majored in film in college and all that, and intending to go into that field, which it's crazy, but and I had a film made from a screenplay that I wrote with a friend like about 25 years ago, which ironically it's pretty forgettable, the film. Ironically titled Amnesia, and it was a fun script though. I mean, I really did script, but they, as often happens, they ruined it, and it was still an interesting experience, and I learned a lot, and I enjoyed, parts of that, as disappointing as it turned out to be. But then I started writing fiction, maybe because of the trauma from that experience, I don't know, but and I don't ever write fiction thinking about movies. Would this be a movie? Who would be in the movie? I can't. When I read books, I do that, but when I'm writing, I don't. Not even consciously trying not to. I just don't. So when this book was optioned, Shriver, and we were talking about casting, I was like, I don't know. I don't see anybody. I see me as Shriver, because it was so much about my feelings. But the experience was much more enjoyable this time. The filmmaker, a guy named Michael Marin, he wrote the screenplay and directed it, and he's very in tune with the world of writing. His wife is a very successful writer. He's a writer, a journalist originally. He knows the world of literary festivals and the crazy stuff that goes on, and the pomposity and the sense of imposter syndrome. Everybody has imposter syndrome, so he totally got it. So I felt in good hands, and he would send me different drafts of the screenplay, and I found that process really interesting to see how he made certain changes. The whole first section of the book is so interior. You can't dramatize that unless you have tons and tons of voiceover. And so he had to create a character for the main character to interact with, right? Because he needs to tell him what's going on.
There has to be
So I
some
thought,
dialogue.
okay, if I had written the screenplay, because I was so close to it, if I had tried to write the screenplay, I never even would have thought of that. I mean, maybe eventually I would have, but at first I would have just been like, oh God, maybe the cat talks. He can talk. I mentioned that to the director once. He just laughed. He said, "No talking.
No cats.
Chris,
Okay.
shut up." So anyway, it was fun. It took a long time, as these things often do, and it was, we'd get close, and then they'd pull the plug, and then we'd get close, and they'd pull the plug, and a whole different cast would come in, and that cast would go, and a whole other cast would come in. And then they started filming, and then COVID hit, and then it was like 400 days before they went back. It's just crazy. It's a miracle that thing got made. And I'm pretty pleased with it.
So you both have a lot of experience in working with this, and, you know, you said it's a crazy process and so much doesn't get made. For the people here who have no knowledge of that, can you just talk a little bit about what that process is and why it's so challenging, other than, of course, the millions of people who want to be screenwriters?
Yeah, I mean, so right now, what I'm doing is I'm taking a lot of meetings with executives and pitching ideas to them, and so that's part of the process of screenwriting, specifically TV writing, but feature film writing as well. And so an executive might buy your pilot. A network or a streamer might buy your pilot, but never have it produced. You get paid for the pilot, but it may never see the light of day. Films get optioned and start to get developed, and then funding runs out. Even studios run out of funding. And so that's very much, so Hollywood is very much a crapshoot. The way you heighten your chances is by continually generating work and continually sending it out. It's a numbers game, and you have to also become used to multitasking, working on a variety of projects simultaneously, because as Chris pointed out, it takes a very long time. And on average, to make a feature film, even an independent film, takes 2 years, 2 to 3 years from soup to nuts. From the moment the script is written to then all the pre-production, the development, and then actual principal photography. By the time you get to principal photography, it's usually 18 months, and then it takes another 18 months for it to hit the screens or the streamers. So it's a long process, so you as aspiring screenwriters should be constantly generating work. So when you sell one pilot, take a breather, play, relax, then start again. Because it's the only way to keep in the game. Because it's just an arduous process. Publishing also it takes forever, right? You get the book deal, you write, you edit it, and then even after it's done, you finished editing it, actually hitting the shelves, it takes sometimes 2 years, right? I don't know, on average. But in Hollywood, it will take at least 2 to 3 years. And it's what Chris just described in the process with Shriver is so common, where you sign all the contracts, Julia Roberts said yes, then she gets typhus and can't do it, so Nicole Kidman says yes, but her Botox goes septic and she can't do it, and then next thing you know, you have Kate Hudson, who's just as good.
How'd you know?
I know these things. I know about the septic Botox. Anyway, so these things happen, so you have to be flexible, you have to be adaptable, and it's just, I don't know, it's a miracle. Don't you think that movies get made?
Absolutely.
It really, really is a miracle, like childbirth.
Yes. So if from the moment that we agreed that, okay, Michael was optioning the book to the moment it came out was 10 years.
Yes.
It was 7 years before they started shooting. So, then there's another 3 years because of COVID. And then post-production. And then it's like, well, now we need a distributor, because it was an independent production and everything. So it takes a long time. And in between, just a brief story, at one point it was connected to this production company that had done a couple of interesting independent films. They'd done that movie Hereditary, which was like this scary
A24?
movie. It wasn't A24, but it was like the
Hereditary's
producer,
great. Yeah.
right? So it was like, oh, that's cool. But then this company bought the rights to just call themselves National Lampoon, as in National Lampoon's Animal House. So they said, we're gonna start making movies, and we're gonna call it National Lampoon's whatever. And our first one's gonna be National Lampoon's Shriver.
Oh, man.
So I'm like, oh God, this is gonna be horrendous. And the director's like, oh God, I'm gonna try to make this work, and it's not, And then it became very clear that this particular guy was shady, and didn't have as much money as he thought, or he said he had. And our option ran out. His option, Michael's option ran out, and my option ran out right around the same time. And we just agreed, okay, we're not gonna re-up the option. We're just gonna go. And then they sued it, you know. And then all the changes he made to the screenplay while they were on board, he had to unmake, because if they made the film with those changes, they would say, well, that's our property. So this is why it takes so long.
I just want to say something. This shouldn't discourage you. No, seriously. No, I'm always on these panels. I'm not always on these panels, but I've attended panels, and you get all these hoity-toity people, industry experts, and the students are sitting there, and they want to learn, and all these experts do is say, it's awful, it's terrible, you're never going to make it, the publishing world is disgusting. You know, they're so smug. You know, and in Hollywood, people are similar. You know, they made it, and they're all excited that they made it, and they're here to impart wisdom. But their egos and narcissism get in the way, and they forget that they're here to encourage you, because this is what you need to hear. It's hard, but anything worth doing is hard. So I remember at NYU. By the way, Michael Marin's wife is my NYU professor.
Oh, really?
Danny, yeah.
She was my wife's professor at the New School.
Really? Okay.
She gets around.
She does. And so one of the things that a professor said at NYU is a shark pit, snake tank, whatever. I mixed it up. But it was very competitive. But I remember one of the professors said, look, the difference between those who are actually successful, whatever success means to you, because it's relative, right? People who make it are those who just don't give up. You can't, if this is what you really want, then you have to keep going. And there's going to be really horrible days where all you hear is no. But you have to shrug it off. You really, really do. And the other thing is, in the business, in Hollywood, you know, you'll come up with an idea, and somebody will go, oh God, you'll go to a meeting, you'll meet with an executive, and they'll go, nobody's doing that anymore. Nobody's doing that. Like, we kind of want, like a movie about hepatitis meets, you know, COVID meets like a fashion maven, you know? So your thing is no good. So, but you don't have another idea, and you've got another meeting lined up. So you go to another meeting with your idea, and they go, oh my God, this idea is brilliant. And I'm like, okay, I was just told that nobody's making movies like this or shows like this. There's an expression about Hollywood, which is nobody knows anything. And that is absolutely true. Nobody knows anything. Nobody knows what's going to be successful and what's not going to be successful. Steven Spielberg says he doesn't know until he sits in the back of a theater that one night where the movie comes out, when the first days it comes out, and he watches the audience. He never watches the movie. He watches the audience. And that's how he knows if something is going to be successful. He's like, he thought Jaws was going to tank. And the producers who made Star Wars were already like, you know, packing up their belongings because they were sure they were going to be fired. And so, you know, so you have to remember that. I wish people told me that when I was coming up and I was attending panels, instead of telling me how I was never going to make it. That's not true. You can. It's possible. Look at us, the three of us, we're sitting here. So I just wanted to say that, you know.
Great. I also think the other thing that's important there is that there are all levels of success.
Yes, it's relative.
Right? So there's Steven Spielberg, and then there are people who have one independent film, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't diminish Chris in any way, right? It's just a different kind of success. And there are people that publish one poem and damn, you got a poem out into the world and that's the most amazing thing ever. And there are people who are poet laureate of the United States. So I think that you have to be really clear about what you want and take what you get as something to motivate you going forward. Right? I think that's really powerful too. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the audience. We have time for, I don't know, about 10 minutes worth of questions, and then we have to let the librarians go home. Yes, sir.
It's a little comment. My niece is an artist out in San Francisco, but to put food on the table when she first started, she got a job teaching literacy at a juvenile detention center. And this really violent young man became her protector.
Oh,
Wow,
Very strange.
interesting. That's so interesting.
James?
Happens.
Yeah.
You guys have obviously had work made into films or TV shows, and you see a lot of controversy nowadays with shows having their materials be changed a lot from the source material, and it's either good or bad. But a lot of time the blame is placed on the authors. So I wanted to know your guys' opinions of like how you see those types of situations. And if a show having their ending changed and it being received as bad has a negative effect on the author themselves.
Well, the thing is, when you sell something, you're going, and if you're not writing it, and even if you are writing it, you're gonna, it's very collaborative, right? Film and television. So you might have to accept the fact that your work is gonna be changed. I mean, Chris just explained how Shriver was adjusted and, you know, changed and adapted, and had to be, because it was a piece of fiction that was being dramatized for the screen. I'm not sure the author is blamed for a screenplay going awry from a piece of fiction. I've never really heard that. I mean, the thing is, you have to accept that, you know, you're gonna have to accept adjustments and changes. If you sell your work, if you start working with others, it's part of the nature of the business. The fact is, well, negative reviews and criticism are hard to take, you know, but you have to sort of keep philosophical about it, a little detached. Maybe not read reviews, good or bad.
Yeah, ditto. Once you sign it over, you give it to, you know, a director / producer. It's their baby now, and they can do whatever the heck they want. That's one of the tough realities of it. Now, sometimes they do a great job. Sometimes they make changes that are you know, like, why didn't I think of that? Well, you know, I wish I had thought of that. There's a couple of those in the film of Shriver that I'm like, oh, okay, shoot, I should have done that. And then there's things that I wouldn't do. But yeah, it's very rare that at least nobody's blamed me yet for any changes. People who see the movie and they don't read the book, they might say, oh, I hated that movie, so the book must be bad. So they might blame the author.
It does affect.
But you know, they don't blame the author for the changes. Thank goodness. Although I take credit for anything good.
There you go. Yes. Yes.
First of all, hi, Professor Peterson. I'm Isabella from your.
Oh, hi, Isabella. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So I have 2 questions. First of all, it's pretty simple, kind of basic question. I know probably want to know, but how do you kind of start getting into screenplays? Because you know it feels very daunting. It kind of seems like an industry where you have to know someone to get in, but what if you don't know someone? And my second question is regarding character development. Sometimes I find it hard to, if there's a character that I really like, to not make it into a Mary Sue, a character that has no flaws, because I know it's important that they have flaws. So how do you kind of not do that, but in such a way that doesn't lose your image of that character?
Can you repeat the second question? I'm a little
Yes,
confused.
sure. The second question was regarding character development, kind of how to avoid them becoming perfect sort of Mary Sue character that doesn't really have much flaws, which
Right.
can be
I
hard
make
to
sure they
have
have flaws.
Well, you have to make sure they have to have a fatal flaw. They have to have some internal obstacle that they have to overcome, as well as an external obstacle, which is the antagonist. So yeah, you avoid it by giving them flaws. You have to. You know, and I think that's one of the first points of character development, is that you have to sort of think about what their goals are, what's preventing them from reaching their goals, and what their fatal flaw is. Is that what's preventing them, or is it a number of factors? What their emotional filters are at any given moment, both you know, consciously and unconsciously, because it's through that prism, whatever the filter is, anger, grief, whatever it is, that you are going to direct the plot. because they're going to make specific choices based on those emotional filters. So your flaws are directly related to that. In terms of the first question, I didn't know anybody when I entered into. I am a Bangladeshi American Muslim chick. There's like nobody like me in Hollywood except me. I'm very proud to say, but I'm trying to create more avenues for people like me. You know, so I'm trying to get into the rooms, trying to get on those sets, trying to get stuff produced that opens up that, that equity and diversity. So as I said before, you have to make work. Otherwise, nothing is going to help you. No amount of, well, that's not true. I mean, if you're Gwyneth Paltrow, you don't have to make that much work. You have connections. But if you're not, if you don't have that advantage, then you make work. And the more work you make, the more you work on your craft, the more you work on your storytelling, the more you maintain your level of curiosity and observation and joy, which is going to be hard, but the more you do that, the more you create work and send it out there, that's how you break into it. Take classes, go to film festivals. This bit of advice I'm giving you is so disingenuous because I hate networking. I absolutely deplore it. I'm so bad at that. I went to the Tribeca Film Festival and I didn't talk to anybody. In fact, somebody goes, you can't just stand in a corner drinking tequila. You have to speak to somebody. So the tequila helped. Yes, I am Muslim. The tequila helped, and I went and I started talking to people. But you have to do that, I'm telling you. I know it's hard. Take a friend. Go to conferences. I can't see your face, but I'm directing it at you. Go to conferences, talk panels like these, and join writing groups, stuff like that, and it'll happen. You're making your own opportunities. That's how it works.
I don't have much to add, but I mean, it when you say it's who you know, I mean, it is who you know, but so you have to know a lot of people. You just have to broaden that, network of who you know, and you'll find hopefully with hard work, and if your work is solid, you'll find somebody eventually. But this is the hardest part. We think, the hardest part is writing these things, which is hard. It's really hard to write a novel.
Yeah.
God, it's hard.
It's so hard.
And then it's like, well, okay, now I have to sell
The selling.
I have to find somebody to publish it, and it's
Yes.
drudgery.
I have one.
Are you agented, both of you?
No.
No, okay.
I am.
All right, so that's interesting too, and that's an interesting answer to her question.
Yeah, I have a literary agent, but I haven't spoken to her in 2 years. This is true. She's occasionally sent me an email going, still trying to sell it. I'm in France. And that's it. But I have a manager for my film and TV, and she's on it. She's amazing. She's Nigerian American, and she's like, don't take no for an answer. You want showrunner? Her motto is, what would Shonda Rhimes do? I'm like, okay. So I try to do what Shonda Rhimes would do. So I ask for what I want. The worst they can say is no. But one of the things I just wanted to add to your students, what's her name, Isabella? Isabel. So the other thing you can do, and this goes for all of you, there's something called roadmap writers. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So they have a lot of different opportunities where you can submit your screenplay, and that gets you a meeting with an agent or a manager where you can pitch. I would send to some contests, just like you're applying to college, different tiers of contests. So, you apply to the Sundance, and then you apply to the more local ones, the screenplay contests. And by the way, agents and managers do look at screenplays that have placed, like quarterfinalists, semifinalists even. And if you win, that really opens up opportunities. You keep doing it. Now that costs money. They're fees, just like application fees. So, budget it out, think about it. You have to approach breaking into the industry as a full-time job yourself. So I would try that. And some of these things are scams. So make sure you do your research, check the reviews. By the way, no agent is going to ask you for a fee. No agent is going to ask you for a fee to represent you. That's a scam. just, all these little things. So keep that in mind. They're gonna take the money, a real agent is gonna take the money. 15%, 10 to 15% always. But
Out of your sales.
out of your sales. So that's why they're not gonna ask for anything up front. So please keep that in mind.
Just a quick story. I just remembered this. When Shriver first came out, I'm a big fan of Alexander Payne, the director and screenwriter, Sideways and The Holdovers and all these great movies. And I read an article about him, and it said, well, when he's from Omaha originally. Of course, he lives in Los Angeles. Probably lives several places, but he owns a theater, an old theater in Omaha, and that's where he gets his mail sometimes. And I looked up the theater, and I sent him a copy of the book with this very, very gushy fan letter. It was sincere, though. It was gushy. And I sent that to him in about 2013. And 2020, when Shriver was already in production, but it was during COVID, so it was on hiatus, I get a phone call one day from Alexander Payne saying, "Oh yeah, I'm just catching up on my mail during this COVID thing. And I was so appreciative. I loved your letter. It was so nice. And your book is really funny. What's going on with that?" And I said, "You're too late." And we had this lovely conversation, and I sent him a whole bunch of other stuff, and he went off to Greece. And I haven't heard back from him, but maybe
You
I
might,
will.
though.
Give it
Maybe
5
I will.
What
years.
Yeah, right?
What if there's something else? He
Yeah.
knows you now. You see,
He
that's.
he does know
you
me
see-
now. Because this other guy went and saw a screening of The Holdovers, and he had a book, his own book, and he said, "Oh, I'd love to give you this book." And I had given this guy a blurb. I hate blurbs, but I gave him this blurb, and it was right on the front cover of this book, and Alexander Payne goes,
I know this guy.
"Oh, Chris Belden, I know him."
Wow.
I thought, oh.
Okay, so Chris, this is a teaching moment.
Yes.
Chris made an opportunity for himself. He doesn't know Alexander Payne, but he made work that he could then give to somebody. That's how it works. I got Quantico because I wrote Raisins on Virgins, and somebody saw it, and the executive producer of Quantico was looking around for a writer of a specific cultural background, and they said, "Oh, did you hear about this play?" And no, who's the writer? The next thing you know, I'm in a network writer's room, making a show. But the only reason I'm in that room is because I made work and I put it out there. No agent, no connections. That's how it happens.
Okay, thank you so much for coming. Please give them a nice round of applause. They have all the amazing work that they have been talking about up here for sale, so I encourage you to support the writers who need the money, right? Writers always need money, buy books. You can also just come up and talk to them for a few minutes and ask them questions. We do need to be out of here by 8 o'clock because the librarians need to go home.
Yes.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Giving us pleasure.